I live near Washington, D.C. This is not a place known for arriving at truths, let alone the metaphysical kind. Nonetheless, in a fully nonpartisan mindset, I want to share some ideas that seem to me to reflect fundamental truths about human beings, as well as offer a new spin on an old proposition about what may be true for the cosmos. And FYI, I'm not going to use any slides. I'll just speak directly to the camera. First, reflecting the value of what Barbara just shared with us, I'd like to encourage everyone to take a moment for a good stretch, like so. Uncoil the spine, give it a good twist, maybe revolve your neck like so, and take a nice deep breath and settle back into your chair. Feel yourself situated. Now, ask yourself, what is it that you're doing? Well, watching and listening to me, obviously, but you're doing much more than that. You're breathing, clearly. Also, your cells are metabolizing, your blood is flowing, your neurons are firing, electrochemical signals are being relayed between your brain and the rest of your body. Your digestive tract may still be working on the remains of lunch. Your immune system is somewhere between active and quiescent. Oh, and your overall state of awareness is constantly shifting too. Your proprioceptive system is continuously recalculating your balance and position in space. And your senses are likewise monitoring the environment so that anything out of the ordinary, a dog's bark, an itch, an odd smell, will make itself known. I'm pointing out all of this to emphasize that our self, which we typically take to be static, is very unstatic. Our body and mind, two sides of the same coin really, body-mind, is perhaps more a process than a thing. This is a point I'll return to in just a bit, but the other thing I want to emphasize is how much our conscious thinking, verbalizing selves depend upon the mundane but absolutely essential processes of the body-mind, which in some constitute sentience, the feeling of what happens, to quote Antonio Damasio. More recently, Christoph Koch published a book called The Feeling of Life Itself. The more conscious selves probe consciousness, the more they find that Descartes was wrong. We are because we feel, not because we think. As the author Milan Kundera once quipped, "I think, therefore I am," is the statement of an intellectual who underrates toothaches. With that understanding, I want to offer a recalibration of the way we approach panpsychism. For some of you, it may just be a tweak. For others, it may be a more far-reaching adjustment. So, panpsychism, the idea that the universe is alive, or at least contains the seeds of aliveness. Cognitive philosophers and neuroscientists usually pose the question, is the universe conscious, or does consciousness pervade the universe? By this, they generally mean, is some form of experience a trait of the universe? When they frame it as consciousness, they may not be implying higher order forms of awareness, such as the ability to question, to remember, to judge, to anticipate, to know. Nonetheless, I believe the difference with just plain sentience is important. I would rather ask, is the universe sentient in some way? Is an elementary capacity to feel built into matter itself? Now, here's where I believe the distinction is germane. All those body-mind processes that I mentioned earlier, digestion, immune function, proprioception, etc., they're all happening outside of our conscious awareness, unless something goes awry or otherwise comes to our attention. Our stomach gurgles and we realize it feels upset. We feel a chill and decide we should put on a jacket. Furthermore, we may dimly sense something, but not consciously know precisely what it is. For example, we've all felt, I'm sure, vaguely uneasy or disturbed at times and are bothered because we can't quite grasp what the matter is. Also, we have a subconscious or preconscious mind that serves up Freudian slips or déjà vu, or more profoundly, insights from dreams. None of these things can we say we were aware of before they became conscious. So I would personally like to reframe panpsychism to ask whether the universe might be conducive to sentience or to feelings and images beneath the threshold of consciousness. On the one hand, we would have a larger net to fish with. On the other, we would have a clearer opportunity to account for some fascinating phenomena that the members of this society take seriously, but most scientists don't, despite these experiences being long-standing and widespread. What are these phenomena? Synchronicities, telepathic or telesomatic impressions, precognitive dreams, apparitions, and poltergeists. I propose that upon inspection, these provide evidence that the cosmos is sentient, not necessarily conscious, but sentient. So a synchronicity, as you know, is a meaningful coincidence. What makes something meaningful? Typically, meaning is felt. It has an emotional truth or resonance within us. Additionally, as Carl Jung explained, synchronicities often, as in dreams, present a symbol or image reflective of the emotional truth that's coming to light. As psychologists know well, and artists too, feeling lends itself to imagery. The particular images evoked can be highly personal, highly communal, or both at the same time. The stronger the feeling, the more affecting and widely understood that image is likely to be. Now, let's look for a moment at telepathy and telesomatic experiences. First, at the roots of the words. Telepathy means distant feeling, and telesomatic means distant body. They both relate to feeling or perceiving something where the cause is not nearby or obvious. Telepathy is typically a mental impression that someone is ill or that something's not right or that something is about to happen. A telesomatic event is where you feel in your body that something is amiss. And the feeling corresponds to confirmation that someone you know or care about was indeed harmed, or at least in harm's way, at approximately the same time. As with synchronicities, telepathic impressions and telesomatic experiences can and do shake you up. They leave you wondering, how could I have possibly known that? And this is key. They almost invariably involve people that you're close to, family members especially. Emotional bonds appear to be central in this phenomenon. One's pets can also be involved because, of course, we grow close to our animals and vice versa. My family has had a couple of remarkable anomalous experiences, both involving pets that had recently passed on. It seems that when physical and emotional bonds are in danger of being broken, or actually have been broken, these types of anomalies are much more likely to occur. We heard Peter Fenwick attest to this pattern earlier today. The same seems to be true of precognitive dreams, although these are also known to relate to natural disasters or acts of violence where the emotional upheaval of many people seems to exert an influence. Scores of precognitive dreams related to the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center have been documented, for instance, with the images indicating panic, airplanes crashing, people trapped in or running from buildings. What's even more striking, but less well known, is that several of Osama bin Laden's henchmen, individuals who hadn't been involved in planning the attacks, themselves reported dreams of airplanes crashing into buildings prior to 9/11. Evidently, their Confederates' plans, or rather the striking imagery of those plans, somehow leaked. Turning to apparitions, these seem to relate quite often to acts of violence. Haunted houses and other places like battlefields are legendary for specters. The idea of spirits lingering where in life they had some unresolved concerns or unfinished business is also popular. Who knows if this is true? But as I discussed in my first book, there's evidence of a connection between apparitions and strong emotion, as well as with obsessive compulsive disorder, which of course relates to the regulation of one's feelings. Poltergeists, too, seem an impressive example of subconscious concerns that transmute into bizarre physical action. The sheer energy and volatility of many poltergeists, not to mention their quirky unpredictability, suggests a parallel with feelings which themselves arise and subside and are sometimes vehement, but nevertheless transient. The common thread running through all these anomalies is strong or unacknowledged feeling. This brings us back to sentience and the distinction between what we know or realize, i.e. what is plainly conscious, and what is going on beneath awareness, but is still part of our sentient body-mind. Panpsychism, I wish to propose, is fundamentally correct, but best understood from the vantage point of feeling, which I suspect the universe is conducive to. So here's the version of panpsychism that got me thinking in this direction. It was proposed, or at least given a popular platform in 2019 by the journalist Anneka Harris. Her approach centers not on the seeds of awareness that might be elemental to matter, but on the universal forces operating on that matter. This avoids what's been called the combination problem of panpsychism, namely how the building blocks of life that aren't sentient themselves, such as skin cells, neurons, blood vessels, etc., somehow configure into a living organism that is. Harris doesn't focus so much on the material elements or even the organisms as discrete things. Instead, she draws attention to the processes going on in the self, how dynamic they are, and on the shifting nature of a person's experience at any given time and place. This convergence of dynamic selves or body minds or biological processes or whatever you want to call them, this convergence with space and time gives rise, in her estimation, to a continuous, pervasive field of sentience. Let me quote from her writing. Just as space-time and gravity have an interactive relationship, sentience can be thought of as a fundamental field that interacts with and is integral to matter. We typically don't think of space-time as bits and pieces that build on each other. It's simply everywhere. And I don't think we should be tempted to think of sentience as divisible into building blocks either. Rather, it makes more sense to talk about a field that contains a range of content, the content depending on the other forces or fields it's interacting with. In the same way that gravity is a two-way street, matter warps space-time, and the shape of space-time determines how matter moves, a sentience field would imbue matter with the capacity to experience a whole range of content, unquote. So in a nutshell, Harris is arguing that not only are we in flux, but that our body-mind processes are continuously being influenced by a variety of pervasive universal forces, from gravitational and electromagnetic to space-time and sentience. Now, I have to note that her book is called Conscious, and all her references are to consciousness, not to sentience. But in a Twitter exchange we had, she said she agreed that sentience is the better term. So I've made that change. Furthermore, and even more significantly, Harris suggests that subjective experiences might not be isolated, even though the matter that makes up each one of us is discrete to our own bodies. She raises the prospect that the universe could be, and here I quote again, teeming with sentience, with content flickering in and out, overlapping, combining, separating, flowing in ways we can't quite imagine. Actually, in my opinion, we can imagine, because the anomalous phenomena I mentioned earlier, synchronicities, telepathic and telesomatic impressions, precognitive dreams, apparitions, and poltergeists, are relatively plentiful. Talk to virtually anyone, and you will soon find such experiences to be far more common and far less anomalous than we as a society assume. This speaks to the pervasiveness of the sentience field and how it is likely influencing and being influenced by the most meaningful of inputs all the time. What do these anomalies share? In my estimation, it's the truths that relate to our well-being, the plainly emotional warnings and communications that demand to be shared. Consider it is the brain's job to sort through what our senses are gathering at any particular moment. Determinations are constantly being made as to whether something needs to be acted upon, whether it should be duly noted and filed away, or if it can be ignored altogether. Our brain's emotional circuitry is the lead player in this evaluation, assigning shades of feeling as appropriate. The type and degree of feeling equates to the current or remembered meaning for the individual. So not only are all these feelings and images part and parcel of sentience, but together they constitute our self-image and sense of meaning. At times of special threat or of significant underlying turmoil, something of this flow of feeling may influence the sentient field and cause another person to experience something that must strike them as completely bizarre. The spontaneity of these phenomena and their instantaneous conveyance as images or symbols seems of a piece with the emotional dynamic. Another clue that anomalies relate to an interaction with fundamental cosmic forces is that they violate the customary laws of space and time. Perhaps those laws are, as Rupert Sheldrake puts it, more like habits that can be overturned or reshaped, given the presence of another fundamental force, in this case, sentience. Just as each of us is continuously placed in space-time and affected in unseen ways by gravity and electromagnetism, so we could be, in effect, bobbing in a sea of sentience. The situation may be akin to that portrayed by Edward Abbey in his famous novel Flatland 135 years ago. His book describes the visit of a sphere from a three-dimensional world to the two-dimensional world called Flatland. The inhabitants there are geometric figures without depth who can't conceive of depth. All they can make of the sphere that lies in their plane is a circle. They're astonished that the circle is able to grow or shrink at will by rising or sinking into the plane of Flatland, and that it even disappears and reappears in a different place by leaving the plane and then re-entering it. The sphere tries to explain the concept of a third dimension to the two-dimension protagonist, a square, but the square just doesn't get it. He can't understand what it means to have thickness, nor can he understand that the circle came from up above him. We may be like that square when we try to conceive of the operation of sentience vis-a-vis the dimensions that we do recognize, space-time, gravity, electromagnetism. When we experience a synchronicity, or when we have an apparently telepathic dream, or when we are jolted by another psi phenomenon, it could be like perceiving a circle instead of a sphere. What we see isn't the full reality, so it makes little sense, but it surely jolts us out of our shoes. I want to close with a short anecdote. It's from psychologist Steve Taylor in the UK, who some of you may know, and if it's the same Steve Taylor that I saw in the participants list, he may be on the line with us now. He talks about a wonderful surprise one evening when his usual stream of inner chatter, the linguistic product of our neocortex, was quieted. He writes, "Feeling serene after a meditation, I decided to go for a walk. It was a beautiful evening, clear blue sky beginning to shine through. I walked around the field near my house several times, looking at the sky, amazed at how beautiful it was. My mind was quiet and I felt full of vitality. I began to feel as though I were being engulfed in the sky, and my normal sense of space was changing. The sky didn't seem up there. It seemed to be around me, a part of me. I felt that the blue-black space around me was alive, that the universe was a living being. Every time I stared at the sky, the feeling grew stronger. It only stopped when my mind started thinking again." So when our monkey mind calms down, we have a greatly enhanced ability to drink in the outside world. What we perceive at such times, Taylor says, and I agree, relates to the sentience that dwells underneath our usual intellectual self-consciousness. We feel alive to the natural beauty of our surroundings. We also shed our customary view of things as separate from one another. What's out there versus in here becomes a moot point. During these special junctures, we sense the unity of all nature. In the end, I want to advocate for sentience and emotion as keys to an overarching view of a more than human, more than temporal, and more than strictly physical world. Call it panpsychism if you like. Whatever it is, its explanation will yield more surprises and more meaning than we can possibly guess.